Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Watch for Me NC webinar for prospective applicants. My name is Dan Jolene. I work here at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center with Laura Sant, and I'll turn over everything to her just shortly. Before I do, I just wanted to let you all know as attendees sort of what you have access to during the webinar and how you can solve some problems you may run into. So if you look at your attendee panel, probably geared over there on the right-hand side, you can see that you'll have the ability to type in questions and chat messages and send them over to us during the webinar. And we encourage you to do that if you do have questions or comments as we move along. We don't have the ability for everybody to actually speak on the webinar, so only our panelists are set up that way. But if you do have questions, we'll be monitoring that area during the session. So please put them there. Any questions related either to the subject matter that we're talking about or just technical issues that you're facing. If you run into trouble with your video feed or your audio, it's usually as simple as just logging out of the webinar, closing it down, and logging back in, or calling back into the phone number. So we should be able to solve all problems in that way. But with all that said, Laura, if anything comes up, I'll be monitoring things, but I'll turn it over to you to go ahead and get started with the webinar.
Thanks, Dan. So yes, I'm Laura Sant with UNC's Highway Safety Research Center. We provide support to NCDOT in the operation of the Watch For Me program, and I'm just going to be covering some information about what the Watch For Me program is for those of you who are considering applying this year, or for those of you who have been involved in the past and you want to learn a little bit more about what our plans are for the 2017 program. And I am joined by Ed Johnson, who is the NCDOT Division of Bike and Ped Transportation Acting Director. Hi, Ed. I don't know if you can speak on the call right now, but we hope to be able to open up your audio if you would like to speak at some point. Until then, you can always chat us as well. And then I'm also joined by Dan Jolene and Stephen Heine and Sarah Johnson, who are part of HSRC's team. So at any point, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us, and I'll have some contact information at the end as well. So in today's meeting, I just want to cover a little bit of background about what the Watch For Me program is, how it originated, its history and results to date, and then I'll get into some of the details about what participants get as part of the program and what those requirements for participation are. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how you can apply and participate, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. If you have a burning question and you maybe can't make it to the end and you want to go ahead and ask it, feel free to enter that question into the chat pod at any point. So in North Carolina, there are more than 2,400 pedestrian crashes and 700 bicycle crashes each year, resulting in hundreds of fatalities and thousands of dollars in health care costs and other burdens. And so we see the Watch For Me program as a critical part of a 5E approach to help address these crashes and safety issues. Those E's are education, enforcement, encouragement, education, and evaluation. And then this Watch For Me program also complements other work that's happening involving engineering and emergency management services and other things that are happening at the state level and the local level. The main goal of the program is to really raise awareness of pedestrian and bicycle safety issues through public education and law enforcement. A lot of the awareness that we're trying to raise is with the general public, but then also a big aspect of the program is helping provide training and capacity building amongst law enforcement and agency staff so that they are also better aware of pedestrian and bicycle safety issues and their role in making improvements. And the goal is that over the long term, this will help create a culture of safety, both within organizations and with the broader traveling public, that can help lead to reductions in those injuries and fatalities. We work on focusing on a number of different safety behaviors through the program. We consider it to be very comprehensive in that we're not picking on any one type of road user. So we focus on driver yielding issues, how drivers can better be aware of pedestrians and understand their role in yielding at crossings and other locations. We focus on how drivers can pass bicyclists more safely and ensure safety around when they're sharing the road with bicyclists. And we work to promote attentiveness amongst pedestrians and bicyclists as well, making sure that they're being safe in parking lots and at intersections and around buses and other high crash locations. And we also work to help promote visibility amongst these road users at night so that everybody can see other folks when they're traveling, since a large portion of the pedestrian and bicycle crashes do occur during low light conditions. What the program isn't is necessarily, it's not a jaywalking campaign or anti-jaywalking program. That is certainly one aspect of what some communities work on if that's a problem in their area, but that's not the sole strategy that the Watch For Me program focuses on. It's also not a one-time effort. Most of the most successful communities have been involved for many years and are involved routinely in doing pedestrian and bicycle education and outreach throughout the year. It's not necessarily a one-time media blitz or a flyer distribution program, but what it is a comprehensive program that is led by partners at the local level across the state and supported by NCDOT. It's data-driven and it's long-term. And what I mean by data-driven is that the behaviors that I mentioned that we focus on through the program are driven by our knowledge of crash data and where pedestrian and bicycle crashes happen, and our knowledge of the human behaviors that need to change to help reduce those crashes. And the strategies that we use are evidence-based. And so we're not just working on individual behavior change, but as I mentioned, we're working to help build capacity at that organizational level. We're coordinating with changes that are happening to roadways to improve safety for the transportation environment. And then more broadly, we want to create that social change that creates an awareness and an understanding of the roles and responsibilities of all different road users and how they can improve safety. And again, we do expect that the program is really more of a long-term approach. These issues and changes don't really happen overnight. And so we help promote ways that the Watch For Me strategy can become ingrained and institutionalized at cities throughout the state. A little bit more background for you. The program began with funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Back in 2012 and 2013, we pilot launched the effort in the Research Triangle. And then ever since, we've been expanding it. So we're now on our fourth round of calls for applications. And you can see by the map here, we've been growing every year. So we went from 4 communities to 10, and now we have 25 partnering coalitions across the state. And we expect to continue growing each year. We do have Watch For Me programs in most of the major urban areas, but I'll say that a lot of smaller towns and more rural counties, especially those that are very nearby some of the more populated parts of the state, have also shown a strong interest in the Watch For Me program. And there is a lot of room for how the Watch For Me program looks in different places. It's not a silver bullet approach where it's the same in all places. So one of the main questions we get is, well, what do most people do when they're part of the Watch For Me program? And for the most part, every community that joins already has a pretty established coalition that works to coordinate education and enforcement plans during the peak campaign season, but also throughout the year. So that often entails organizing a kickoff event, working with local media, engaging the public about safety issues, about where pedestrian and bicycle problems exist, about how people can change their behaviors, and also other ways that they can make pedestrian and bicycling more safe modes of travel. It often also involves coordinating with schools, with parent groups, with advocacy groups, to get the message out, and presenting to city councils and elected leaders and other transportation decision makers to make the program more effective at that higher level of where policies and planning processes are taking place. And then most agencies, because this is often very much led by law enforcement departments, there's a large law enforcement component to that, and I'll speak a little bit more about what that looks like. But often pedestrian crosswalk operations or bike light distribution programs are part of the everyday campaigns that we hear mostly about. And to do all this work, most communities have a really strong coalition of different partners. This may involve the municipality, the local or the county police or sheriff departments. Often it involves working with planning and public works or engineering departments that are engaging with the community about pedestrian and bicycle safety issues and needs, as well as their respective communication and public relations staff. Some programs are led directly by universities and campus police. In other communities, we see that those universities and campus police are just part of a bigger local or regional program that reaches the entire municipality. We do also see many communities working closely with their parks and recreation departments because they plan so many events and festivals and have kind of built-in methods to reach and engage with the public. And then since there is a large school component to this, many communities are also working with their school districts and their active routes to school coordinators. And some also work with Safe Kids and other safe coalitions. So really there's a mix of partners that's probably different in every community, and the approach that each coalition takes really depends on the strengths and the resources that the partners are able to bring to it. The enforcement is also not a one-size-fits-all approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the training that we offer to law enforcement agencies. But when we say enforcement, this really could take a lot of different shapes, and it depends on the needs of each community, the resources they have, and what their pedestrian and bicycle safety issues are that they're trying to address. A lot of times it begins with some outreach to the schools and officers doing helmet giveaways or helping plan bike rodeos, sometimes working around school zones to help reduce speed limits and improve safety behaviors so that children can walk and bike to school more safely. A lot of times that involves giving warnings and citations, but in the past we've also seen a lot of communities being really successful with what they're calling Caught Being Good programs, where they're giving positive reinforcement to pedestrians and bicyclists and other road users for the safe behaviors that they're demonstrating to the community. And that often involves working with local businesses to give some kind of positive reinforcement piece, and that's another way to sort of engage the business community at the same time. In terms of the outreach that we see communities doing through Watch for Me, most communities, as I mentioned, have some sort of kickoff or press event at the beginning, a way to engage the media and let them know about what's being planned. There's also a pretty extensive social media outreach to spread safety messages through social media, Twitter and Facebook, Instagram and other platforms. And then many communities distribute the safety resources through events and local businesses, local venues, and any other group that they're partnering with. And what communities report, we do every year a pretty thorough job trying to track what communities are doing and put everything together. And so if you look at our website, watchformenc.org/about, you can see some of the past reports and some of the profiles of what communities have done. But one of the things we ask is what have you gotten out of this program? And what we hear pretty regularly is that communities who are part of Watch for Me really do see a heightened awareness about pedestrian and bicycle safety issues in their communities. The officers who attend our training have more clarity on what the bicycle and pedestrian rules and regulations and laws are and how they can conduct enforcement to help reinforce those safe behaviors. We've seen many changes and improvements made to municipal ordinances and other policy changes happening that are related to pedestrian and bicycle safety. And in general, I think because of the engagement with other partners that's part of the coalition, there's a lot stronger relationships with schools and other partners through this program. A lot of agencies have also reported to us that they see traffic citations and tickets upheld more consistently. They have to spend less time in court, and that they're seeing pedestrian and bicycle safety really integrated into more of their community's plans and policies. And those are all positive things that we think are helping to drive down crash statistics in many locations. We have been measuring outcomes as well. One of the things that we've been measuring over time is how drivers comply with the laws requiring them to yield to pedestrians and crosswalks. And what we've seen, and you can see the reports online too, are that the sites with the longest term, most routine enforcement are seeing significant improvements in driver compliance with the yielding laws. And we're also seeing improvements in pedestrian behaviors as well. What we've been able to measure to date are that in several of the communities where we've been monitoring since 2012, we've seen almost a 32% increase in driver yielding at the crossings that we've been monitoring. We've also been receiving reports from a number of communities that pedestrian and bicycle related crashes are going down. And as I mentioned, many resolutions and policies are happening at the same time that are sort of connected to the Watch For Me program. And we think all of that may be having a positive influence on some of the crashes that we're seeing. If you look at this chart here, what we're showing is how crashes in a 5-year period before Watch For Me was implemented, there was a slow rise. And then amongst the communities, this is the communities that have been involved from the very beginning in Durham, Orange, and Wake County. Since 2012, we've actually seen a slight reduction, about 5% reduction in their crash rate per 10,000 population count per capita. And there's a lot of things that are happening at this time, but this trend, it sort of bucks the trends that we're seeing on a national level, where pedestrian and bicycle crashes are actually on the rise now. And so it gives us reason to pause and try to understand what the potential impact of Watch For Me may be on crashes. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be exploring a little bit more in the next couple of years, is to see if this is a trend that's happening in other Watch For Me communities, or if there might be other factors accounting for this. But regardless of some of the crash outcomes, we have noted a number of other benefits to participation in the Watch For Me program. Many different communities are starting to launch Vision Zero efforts, and North Carolina DOT recently launched their own Vision Zero initiative. And also there are, at the state and local level, many strategic highway safety plans and pedestrian and bicycle master plans that have goals related to improving safety for vulnerable road users and bicyclists and pedestrians in particular. And so we see the Watch For Me program as a real pillar in these other efforts to help improve safety through a multifaceted approach involving law enforcement officers, public health, engineers, planners, and other agency staff. Also, I don't know how many of you have been part of applications for walk and bike friendly communities, but that is an awards or recognition program where they recognize communities that are doing a lot of work to promote walking and biking. And many of the questions that are part of those applications relate to what communities are doing for education and enforcement. So this is one way to really enhance your applications to receive recognition under those programs as well. And finally, the Watch For Me program is recognized by the Governor's Highway Safety Program. They provide support to us to conduct a lot of the training that that goes on with law enforcement officers, and they offer points for Watch For Me related activities for communities that are official partners of the Watch For Me program. So I'll turn to the next part of the webinar, which is to share a little bit more about what participants get and then what they're required to do in return. So one of the things that eligible approved applicants will get is a package of materials and media that will help support all the local outreach that you're doing. So this will involve Pandora radio ads, transit ads possibly on the inside and outside of buses. We have outdoor ads, posters, bike lights, and a whole suite of print materials that would be provided during some of our trainings. And this is all paid for by NCDOT and then distributed to the Watch For Me participants. Here's just a couple of images to show you what some of that looks like. There's bike lights, there's the ads on billboards. Much of the advertising is outdoor advertising designed to reach people when they're walking and biking and driving so that they have an opportunity to immediately put those safety messages into use with their behaviors. And here's a few other examples of clean graffiti, gas tank toppers, and some mobile billboards that we've used. Many of these we've tried to implement in high crash corridors to help very strategically raise awareness in the locations where safety is of most concern. In addition to the media and the materials, participants receive technical assistance primarily by us at the Highway Safety Research Center, but also support from NCDOT, their creative and communications folks, and also from other past participants, many of whom are listening in on this call. So many folks have been involved in this program since 2012 and have very valuable lessons on what has worked and what hasn't worked, and are always sharing great ideas and examples of what they're doing locally. So we learn a lot from them, and we try to share what we're learning with all the participants in the program. We do that through a series of web-based courses that happen about every other month from May until November. And during those times, we try to provide very targeted trainings, share new resources and templates, and provide other tools. Separately from that, we also provide law enforcement training, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. The tools that we provide include warning ticket books for agencies that want to do warning programs in advance of any kind of citation program. Those were actually initially developed by one of our partners in Greenville, and they had so much success that we sort of modeled it and were able to share that ticket book with communities across the state. Some of the new things we're anticipating in this year is providing a little bit more information about the new House Bill 959 that passed and was, I guess, parts of it were enacted in October and of December of 2016. So we'll be sharing a little bit more about that and what that means in terms of implications for how bicycle laws and safety are promoted. The other thing that we'll be focusing on this year is providing more guidance and sample content for social media so that communities can really do a little bit more engagement of their community before and after law enforcement and other outreach efforts to help extend the impact of their programs. And I mentioned the training. We have several options for the law enforcement training that we provide. For communities that have never been part of Watch For Me, we typically require a traditional full-day, one-day workshop where agencies learn a lot about pedestrian and bicycle laws and the different enforcement and education tools that are at their disposal. We also offer a half-day refresher course for the communities that have already gone through that full-day course and really just need more of a refresher or an advanced version to continue talking about some of the issues. And then new this year, we're going to focus on developing some very short targeted roll call training resources that might help reach a broader audience within law enforcement agencies that isn't able to attend those full or half-day workshops. Now, in return, we do ask a number of things as requirements for participation in the program. One is that we want all the partners to really be actively engaged in the meetings and the trainings that we provide. So attendance to those share meetings and the law enforcement training is mandatory. We also don't want those materials that we provide to be sitting on a shelf, and so we require you to disseminate those materials and to show us your plans and evidence of how you distributed some of those materials and messages. And then finally, we require a record of law enforcement operations that were conducted throughout the campaign season. And on that note, we really ask for agencies to provide us help in evaluating the program by submitting their reports of law enforcement operations and other outreach activities that they do. We get a better sense of what's going on at the local level, what's working and what's not, and we can help improve the program from year to year. So we do have a web-based reporting system. We're going to continue to try to fine-tune this and make it as simple as possible for communities to report their activities. And one other way that we try to capture what's happening is by scheduling a brief 30-minute interview with the local contact person to really just help tell their story and share what happened each year. And so that all gets wrapped up into those annual reports that you can find on the website. So to participate in the 2017 program, there's really only a couple of steps that you have to take. First is to make sure that you are eligible. We do only allow a municipal or county agency or a university that has a police department to be the lead on a program. If it's a nonprofit or an agency outside of the community, they really need to be working closely with the local government staff. And then we have an application process. If you go to watchformenc.org/participate, you can find the application. It's a very short application. It's going to be due at 5 p.m. on March 24th. We ask for you to provide contact information and a brief bit of information about why you're applying, who your partners are, what your plans are, and how you plan to leverage any other existing resources. And we strongly encourage communities to be working with other partners in their community and have letters of support that show how your partners are going to be involved in the program. That is one of the things that we really look for when we are reviewing new partner applicants, is that they have a demonstrated capacity and partnership to participate, and that they understand what the program entails and have a clear plan of action for what they're going to be doing. Now, prior partners who have been involved in the past, even if they might have taken a break for a year, are allowed back without a competitive review process, provided that they still complete an abbreviated application. And so when you go to that website, you will see an application for new partners and an application for prior partners. And if you have questions about whether somebody else in your agency may have applied or been part of the program in the past, feel free to reach out to me, and I can always put you in touch with others in your region that either have or may be considering applying if we're aware of them. So the timeline moving forward, as I mentioned, applications are due March 24th. We expect a very short turnaround in that in April we will be announcing new partners. And in very early April, we might even be reaching out to schedule some of those law enforcement trainings in different parts across the state. The typical campaign season where you might see a lot of Watch For Me kickoff events, it really varies by region. Many of our coastal areas, because they see such an uptick in tourism and walking and biking in the summer, they often kick off their programs as early as May. And because Bike Month happens in May, that's a very popular time. Whereas other communities tend to focus closer to August to launch their programs in sync with back-to-school days and other things happening in the fall. So we try to work as best we can with when your campaign is anticipated to start, and if you are accepted, we try to fast-track getting the materials and the media ads to align with when you're kicking off your program. That doesn't always work perfectly, but that is our goal. And then most communities continue through the end of the year when there's a lot of pedestrian and bicycle activity all the way through the end of November, sometimes December. And then typically we regroup and have kind of a wrap meeting in December and talk about what the next year of the program will look like. So at this point, I'll turn it over. We have plenty of time for questions. If you need me to clarify anything, please feel free to type into the chat box. And if you have other questions that you would prefer to handle offline, my information is there on the screen, sant@hsrc.unc.edu. Ed, I don't know if you can turn on your audio if you have anything else to add, but otherwise we'll open it up for discussion.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, this is Ed. The only thing that I would add is to a great and all-inclusive presentation that Laura gave is when you're looking at partnerships in your communities to really not only look at the listing that we gave you for traditional partners, and even some of those may be non-traditional partners, but to really exercise that non-traditional partnership as well. That if there are community alliances that you can do with law enforcement agencies and municipalities or nonprofit civic groups, faith-based groups to align yourself with, that really does strengthen your application. It also strengthens the community and helps you get the word out in many different ways at many different times, whether it's on the weekends or whether it's in the evenings or in the mornings. That just sometimes has proved to be very helpful. But thank you, Laura, for a thorough presentation.
Thanks, Ed. And you just reminded me one of the questions we often get is who typically is the lead on the Watch For Me program. And I will say we're at this point about 50-50 split. Half of the agencies are typically led by a law enforcement officer with support from their planning and communications and public information officer and other community groups. And then I would say another half are pretty much led by the planning department because the Watch For Me program is often built into a local pedestrian and bicycle master plan, and it's part of their purview to help implement those plans. We've had a couple of coalitions that were led by county health departments, and so we do have a couple of outliers, but that's typically what we see. Another question we commonly get is, how much time is this really going to take me on the day-to-day? And that question is a little bit harder to answer because it really varies by community. When we survey the communities involved in the past, the program lead typically says about 20 hours per month is common in the peak times. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of events and doing a lot of Watch For Me outreach and enforcement, then it's going to be more than that in certain months. And sometimes it's a little bit less time when it's just at the planning stages. So it varies by community and it varies by time of the year. But I will say that one of the pieces of feedback we also commonly get is that first-time partners are surprised about how much time it takes them to coordinate and be involved in the very first year. And so that's why we really want folks to know and have eyes wide open going into the program about what it's going to involve. And again, that goes back to why partnerships and spreading the burden across different partner groups is so important.
Well, Laura, there are a few questions coming in, so if you're ready, I can start going through those. And for those who have questions still, please submit those into the chat area. I see at least one hand raised. If you could enter your question into the chat area, that's the best way to field those. But I'll just kind of start working through them, Laura.
Okay.
The first is a question about whether a transit agency is eligible to apply to participate in the program.
That might be a question for Ed to think about and come back to. I will say we have never had a transit agency be the lead in the past, although transit agencies have been involved in that we typically, when NCDOT purchases media, they work with the transit agencies to place that media on mostly buses for the communities that have that. Ed, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, and it would also depend on partnerships, community partnerships for the agency, the enforcement component or the municipal component, to see who they're partnering with. I'd have to check and see. That's a good question. I don't think there's
maybe
any
for that
there,
question, if you want to email me directly, we can follow up in the next day or so and confirm.
Okay. A few others, Laura, just coming in. One is, and I think you may have covered it, but if you could just reiterate it. The question is basically, is law enforcement participation required in the implementation of the program? And I think I know the answer, but if you could respond to that.
Yes, that is the one critical piece. We feel, and this goes back to what I mentioned, Watch for Me being an evidence-based program. We feel that education alone is insufficient, and that education coupled with law enforcement and changes to the built environment is the best way to address comprehensively pedestrian and bicycle safety issues. And so law enforcement is a very critical part of that puzzle. And as I mentioned, law enforcement, their actions may look different in different communities. In some places, the law enforcement are working to review the crash data and then engage with the engineering departments to understand changes that are needed to design guidance or other built environment issues. In other places, the law enforcement are out there giving warnings and citations. In other places, they're working with the schools. But active engagement from the police department or the sheriff or multiple law enforcement agencies is what we consider a very critical part of the Watch for Me program. And we require some level of participation in the training that we provide.
Okay. So, Laura, a few folks are asking this question. Where can we get access to the presentation slides themselves after this meeting to refer back to? Is there a place you would point people to look for those, or maybe email them out? Okay.
Yes, we can certainly email to everybody who attended, but if you go to the watchformenc.org/participate, that is where you will find the information and the application materials that I mentioned. We will also post the slides and the recording of today's webinar on that same page.
Great. And I will I'll drop that link in the chat area and send it out to everybody right now so you can have it. That should answer several of those questions that were out there. So, Laura, when it comes to actually submitting, I feel like the person or agency who's actually applying, completing the information to apply, who should that be, or is there a requirement for what type of agency that is? Is that the law enforcement agency, or is that the city or town staff, or do you have any requirements or guidance on that?
Yes, so when you open the application, it's going to ask you for some information. One is who the lead point person is for kind of the education components of the program, and then it'll also ask for who your law enforcement point person will be. It will provide an option for if you have a university partner that you're working with. We do allow universities, whether it's the public safety department or another entity that's part of campus, to be the lead. They can be separate or they can be part of a bigger coalition. So for example, UNC is part of the Chapel Hill program currently, but some places prefer to actually be separate and distinct because they have so much going on that it's a little bit easier to run their own programs. But when you fill out the application, it is possible for the law enforcement contact to also be the main contact. But what we're looking for is a clear point of contact for whoever is doing the specific enforcement operations and a clear contact for whoever might be leading kind of the more broad community outreach and education component. And so that piece, again, may differ. It could be law enforcement, it could be the planning staff, it could be the city manager, but it does have to be somebody that's a representative of the municipality or the region, I would say. I think we do allow, Ed, for NPOs to be leads as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Laura, a few questions about the actual materials, and it sounds like some of these questions are coming from folks who have participated before, but I'll just go through some of them. One is, will this year's materials include the, quote, tips for being a safe driver posters? Any response to that one, or do we know yet?
Yes, I think the current plan is to continue having the poster series as well as banners, bumper stickers, all of the materials. If you go to the bottom of the Watch For Me NC page, you will see a link that says campaign materials, and you can scroll through and see what some of those media actually look like. Ed, I know the NCDOT has some new communication staff on board. I don't know if there are any plans underway to retool the visuals, but I do know that that's something that we've been hearing a lot from the folks that have participated in the past, that they're really looking for some new graphics to use as well as some of the old favorites.
Yes, we are. We're looking to readdress that, but also include the new HB 959 paradigm to let people know a little bit more about passing laws and lights and to try and introduce some new graphics.
Ed?
That was another question. Are there any new materials to give away this year? But I think you kind of touched on that a bit. Anything else you'd add to that question?
I just touched on it briefly, but I think we're looking at developing a series of social media kind of template content. Some of that might be graphical in nature if we can put together any kind of good visual infographic or video to make use of. And we have been using the Watch For Me NC hashtag. We are trying to see what other kinds of infographics and visuals might be useful to communities that we could put together pretty quickly in-house.
Okay. There was a comment on, or I guess a comment question about using terminology, using the term cyclists versus using the term bicyclists, as the question says that some people refer to themselves not as cyclists, but just as bicyclists or bikers, or is there a thought to how the terminology is used when using materials and doing messaging and putting out information, or any advice you have?
I mean, that is something when we do our training series, we can talk about messaging and what's appropriate for the community given what your goals are. When I think about the Watch For Me program as a whole, I think we try to be very inclusive in the terminology, and we may sometimes interchange bicyclists with cyclists, but we always acknowledge that there are different road users, that there are child bicyclists which have different needs and safety behaviors from adults, and senior pedestrians and child pedestrians also have different needs. And so what we do is we try to provide resources to communities to help them understand their safety needs, who their most at-risk populations are, and how to cultivate a communication strategy that really effectively reaches those different groups in appropriate ways. And we have one of the resources that we offer and that we share and we encourage during the process of the campaign is a communications strategy planning document and related toolkit. So we provide a lot of template talking points and other resources for communities to think through their strategy. But in the end, every community's messaging is going to be slightly different and based on the needs and the problems that they're seeing in their community.
Yeah, that's a good one. And one of the attendees points out that the using the terminology "people on bicycles" is something that they're moving toward, and maybe that helps keep the idea away from being just the strong and fearless bikes, but just everybody who uses a bike at all. So I like that suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at our bumper stickers, "I brake for people" is one of our key messages. You know, we talk about creating a culture shift. One of those cultural shifts is, you know, that people have heightened awareness about the needs of people to be able to get wherever they're going by whatever mode they're choosing to use.
A few others here, and getting to some of the information, some of the things you talked about with the talking points and toolkits. There's a question, I guess, about the balance between the programs, in that a lot of the material seems to be geared toward drivers, but there's a need also to have parts of the program geared toward pedestrians and geared toward bicyclists as well. So can you talk a bit about maybe how the program balances between the two elements? And I'll just say that the training does get a lot into that that piece of it, with, you know, not focusing on just one road user over another. But Laura, can you talk about the balance there?
Yeah, so the balance has to take place at many different levels. You know, part of it is how agencies decide to spend their resources depending on what their problem is. I know in some campus environments, you know, with pedestrians getting let in and out of classes and going all over campus, their needs and their safety issues are very different than you know, downtown Charlotte and their urban core and what's happening there. And so we see different approaches taken, and we try to track that, and that's actually provided in the Watch For Me reports if you want to see a breakdown of how the different agencies give warnings and citations and do outreach by different road users. Some folks really start by targeting drivers because that's the issue that they're concerned with. Others are, you know, they're responding to an issue where they're seeing a lot of community concern about other types of behaviors, bicyclists going through signals or pedestrians darting out in unsafe locations. And sometimes enforcement is not the right approach. Sometimes it's a need for change to the built environment, and we talk about that in the trainings that we provide to officers and other folks involved in the program. But yes, we do see that, you know, with every pedestrian or bicycle crash, there's usually multiple contributing factors, and that could come from the roadway, the physical environment, weather and lighting elements, as well as behaviors on the part of the pedestrian, the bicyclist, and the driver. So we do try to tackle what we can and give a lot of flexibility to the communities in addressing things the way they think are needed.
Right. A couple more questions back on sort of the logistics side of the program and applications. One question is how many staff people are needed for a really successful implementation of the program?
That's a good question. I will say most of when we have our Watch For Me calls, most folks tend to send 2 people per call. A lot of times it's somebody from the planning department and their police department sit in together. We have been encouraging communities when we have these, every other month share meetings, to use that time as a gathering time for all of their partners, so they can all get together before and talk about the program, sit in on the call, and then regroup and have their own kind of local meeting right afterwards. And we've heard that that's an efficient way for some agencies to be involved. But there is, ultimately going to be 1 or 2 people who are going to be the point of contacts for us. And then I think to be successful, the more the merrier, really.
Yeah. Well, and I think you could even get more specific on, or if you're thinking, if someone is with a law enforcement agency and they're thinking about how many officers will I need to maybe implement some of these activities that we're going to sign up to do, what does that look like too? And I think we can probably provide, maybe Laura, if they contact you, we could provide more details about what that looks like. It probably has a lot to do with the type of activity and the location you're working in and that sort of thing too. So there's a lot of factors.
Yes.
But also something that is covered well in the training.
We have had agencies apply in the past that were not accepted just because we felt that they didn't have enough law enforcement staff to do the operations. If you only have 1 officer in your entire town and he's doing everything, he or she is doing everything, traffic and beyond, then you may not have the capacity needed. Most of the pedestrian crosswalk operations require at least 2 people, if not more. Brian Massengill is our lead trainer, and he's on the call now and certainly speaks to what the enforcement staffing needs are in these different operations. But I would expect that it's a little bit more difficult for very small towns with only 1 or 2 officers to really fully engage in some of the law enforcement requirements of the project.
Yeah. Yep. And then Laura, another question, logistical in nature, is that if you're currently under a GHSP grant, are you still eligible for this program?
Yes. Yes, that's not a problem.
Yep. And then something a little more on the technical side or on the legal side is someone's asking about the difference between drivers must stop for pedestrians in a crosswalk and drivers must yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk, having to do with our state law, I guess.
Yep. In North Carolina, we are a yield state, not a stop state. And we do talk a little bit more about implications for that in our training, but I probably won't get into specifics right now.
Yeah. If that's something, the person who asked that question, if you want to contact us to get more detail on that, we'd be glad to provide it. It's a little, it's like dissecting the language, sort of. So. Any more questions out there? Please feel free to send them in. Laura, that was the last one that I'm seeing in our.
I see one more about if small towns that are close together, could they partner in their area? Yes, that is certainly an option, and we have seen that work very well in the Outer Banks and other areas where a number of smaller groups within a larger county put their forces together. And so we would certainly encourage those kind of combined applications. The one challenge to that is the more partner groups you have, the more effort is going to be required to coordinate some of the reporting requirements that are needed to share what the different entities are doing in terms of education and enforcement.
Okay. Great. I don't see any more questions on my end, Laura.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your time and attending today. I'm really excited to hear more about your plans and questions about Watch for Me, if you're looking to apply, certainly feel free to reach out to me. Applications are due to Stephen Heine, and you'll see his email right below mine and on the application form that's on the website at watchformenc.org/participate. And thank you again, Ed and Dan and everybody, for your time on the call today.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.